Karen tried to fine me for unauthorized wind flow, said my tree redistributed leaves irresponsibly. She forged bylaws, fake voted herself HOA president, and brought a chainsaw into my yard at 203 IE Mean. Then her own tree fell and demolished her kitchen. She accused me of eco-sabotage, said I weaponized roots. This wasn't about landscaping, it was about delusion with a clipboard. If I had to pick the exact moment peace died in Marigold Heights, it would be 10:08 a.m. IM on a Tuesday. I was on a Zoom call with a software client in Berlin, halfway through debugging a database nightmare when the sound hit me like a lawnmower crossed with a dentist drill. At first, I thought maybe one of the neighbors was trimming hedges, but the buzzing kept getting louder, angrier. I muted my mic, stood up, and peeked out the window. What I saw made me drop my coffee. Karen was in my backyard, holding a chainsaw, pointed directly at my maple tree. She wasn't wearing protective gear, no goggles, no gloves, just a pastel pink tracksuit and a look of absolute entitlement. The chainsaw roared in her hands as she jammed it against the bark, like she was slicing bread. This wasn't just a misguided neighbor trimming branches. This was a suburban execution attempt. I flew down the stairs and bolted outside, heart pounding. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted, barely believing the words coming out of my own mouth. Karen didn't flinch. She released the throttle and turned around, smile plastered on her face like this was a block party and not a felony in progress. "Good morning, Ethan," she chirped, brushing a strand of hair off her forehead. "Just handling a safety concern." She nodded toward the maple, my 60-year-old red giant that shaded half the yard. "This thing is way too tall. I'm sure you know the HOA has rules about this." I blinked. "There are no height restrictions for trees, Karen, and even if there were, you can't just walk onto my property and start hacking away." She tilted her head with mock sympathy. "Oh, honey, you must have missed the latest election. I'm the new HOA president, just doing my duty." Her tone suggested I should be thanking her for trespassing. My voice dropped to ice. "Even if you were the president, which I highly doubt, you'd still need written approval, notice, and, I don't know, a basic understanding of property laws." Karen sighed like a school principal disappointed in a student. "Look, this tree drops leaves in 6 different yards every fall. It's practically a public hazard. The board voted to remove oversized trees last week. Yours is first on the list." I stared at her. "Karen, your house is 3 lots down and across the street." She shrugged. "Doesn't mean I should have to rake your mess." That's when I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Put down the chainsaw and get off my property, or I'm calling the police." She hesitated, clearly calculating whether this was the hill she wanted to chainsaw herself off of. Then, slowly, she powered down the saw and stepped back. "Fine, but you'll be hearing from the HOA. Expect a citation in the mail. Daily fines, starting today." She stormed off, her tracksuit swishing like a deflated parade balloon. I stood there in stunned silence, the maple tree behind me still intact, at least for now. I hadn't realized it yet, but this wasn't just a bizarre Tuesday. It was the first move in a much weirder, much louder war. And it all started with a chainsaw and a woman who thought leaf piles were a threat to national security. The next morning, I woke up to find an envelope duct taped to my front door, not slid into the mailbox, not left neatly on the porch, duct taped, bright yellow, official looking, and stamped with a cheap ink version of the Marigold Heights HOA logo that looked like it was printed from a 2003 HP DeskJet. I peeled it off and opened it with the same caution I'd reserved for a live grenade. Inside was a citation notice signed by President Karen L. Weaver in a signature so large it spilled into the date field. The offense? Violation of bylaw 19B, unauthorized tree height, potential threat to community safety. Fine, $500, 0 cents, escalating $100, 0 cents daily until resolved. There was no 19B in the bylaws. I knew this because, like any man forced to own a home inside an HOA, I'd memorized every last absurd line of that document out of pure self-defense. Karen had doubled down, hard. Instead of ignoring it, I went proactive. I scanned the citation, took photos of where it had been taped, and emailed everything to Marcus Bentley, the actual HOA president, who, last I checked, had both a conscience and a pulse. I also printed a copy and walked straight over to the HOA office. only to find the door locked and the window taped up with a flyer that said office hours suspended during administrative translation. Karen had staged a paperwork coup and temporarily exiled the real board. At that point, I wasn't just annoyed, I was legally alarmed. I called the non-emergency line for the county sheriff's office and reported the prior day's trespassing. Officer Harlan Green arrived that afternoon, a tall man in mirrored sunglasses with a calm voice that made you want to confess to crimes you hadn't even committed. I explained everything, the chainsaw, the phony fine, the duct tape diplomacy. He took notes silently and asked to see the tree. Maple's in great shape, he nodded. No visible structural issues. Looks like it's been here longer than most of these houses. He knocked on Karen's door. She opened with a smile that could curdle milk and launched straight into a pre-rehearsed speech about urban fire risks and leaf debris clusters. Officer Green listened politely, then cut her off. Ma'am, your actions yesterday were trespassing and property interference. That's a criminal issue, not a landscaping debate. Karen's expression flickered just for a second before she snapped back. As HOA president, I'm entitled to enforce the bylaws, including Bylaw 19B. She handed him a folded copy, freshly highlighted. I leaned in. The formatting was clearly fake. The font was different, and the footnote read, Revised April 2023, Emergency Session. I blinked. There was no emergency session. HOA meetings were quarterly, and the last one was in February. Officer Green glanced between the paper and me. Mr. Maxwell, do you have a copy of the official bylaws? Absolutely, I said. I pulled them from a drawer in my foyer like a priest pulling out scripture. We cross-referenced them right there on the hood of his cruiser. No bylaw 19B, no tree height limit, nothing about maple trees, just a lot of rules about gutter colors and holiday lights. Ma'am, Officer Green said, handing her fake bylaw back, this document isn't valid. And unless you have official HOA board authorization, you need to cease any enforcement activity immediately. Karen bristled. This neighborhood deserves protection. If the rest of the board is too spineless to act, then I will. And if you enter Mr. Maxwell's property again, the officer said flatly, you'll be facing criminal trespass charges. Karen didn't respond. She just pursed her lips, spun on her heel, and went inside, slamming the door hard enough to rattle her plastic flamingos. Officer Green turned to me. I'd recommend security cameras. Something tells me this isn't the end. He was right. That night, I ordered a camera system online. The box arrived 2 days later. But by then, Karen had already made her next move. And it wasn't just a fake fine or an HOA. It was a full-on paper war, one she was determined to win, one illegal printout at a time. By Thursday, I'd had enough. The fake citation, the forged bylaw, and the smug lawn dictator routine had officially crossed the HOA Rubicon. So I sat down and did what any sensible software engineer would do when threatened with bureaucratic warfare. I wrote an email. I CC'd every board member listed in the last official HOA newsletter, attached the forged bylaw 19B, the citation Karen had taped to my door, and included timestamped screenshots from my camera footage. Subject line, urgent, unauthorized enforcement action by Miss Karen Weaver. Within 6 hours, I got 6 replies, all of them confused, all of them furious. Most importantly, none of them had heard a single word about Karen being elected president. At 9:23 p.m., I got a call from Marcus Bentley, the actual HOA president, whose name I hadn't spoken aloud in 2 years. His voice was calm, but there was a fire underneath. Ethan, I'm looking at the citation she gave you. She signed it as president? Yep, I replied, in a font size somewhere between wedding invitation and Times Square billboard. Marcus sighed so hard it sounded like he deflated. She's not president. We haven't even had our annual vote yet. That's scheduled for October. Karen's a volunteer. She signed up to manage the community soccer field schedule and water the rose beds, badly, I might add. I blinked. You're telling me the woman who tried to cut down my tree is in charge of sprinklers? And only if she remembers the password to the irrigation app, he added, which she doesn't. Marcus promised to call an emergency meeting with the HOA board and thanked me for flagging the situation. She's been sending out notices? He asked, almost in disbelief. More than notices, I said. She's building an entire HOA fantasy league in her head, and I think she's trying to score points off everyone's property value. He hung up with a promise. We'll handle this, but you might want to hold off trimming that maple. Something tells me it's about to become a symbol. The next morning, something strange happened. Multiple neighbors started texting me blurry photos of envelopes left on their doors. Same yellow paper, same logo, same oversized signature, different charges. One neighbor got cited for non-conforming curtain patterns, another for lawn inconsistency, one elderly couple driveway too reflective, and then came the cherry on top. My neighbor Rachel forwarded me a notice citing Karen's own house for trash bin visibility. I stared at my phone in disbelief. Karen had cited herself. She'd gone full HOA Ouroboros, eating her own compliance tail. By afternoon, a quiet mutiny was already forming. Neighbors were knocking on each other's doors, waving ridiculous citations like bingo cards. A few were calling Marcus directly. One even joked about forming a counter HOA. And while the idea of a rebel homeowners union was hilarious, it proved something bigger. Karen wasn't running a neighborhood. She was running out of control. That weekend, Marcus called a special HOA meeting, the real one, with minutes, name tags, and actual sanity. Karen didn't attend. She claimed she had a conflict, which we later found out was a self-scheduled Zoom call titled Mandatory HOA Reformation Session, attended only by her cat. But the board showed up. So did half the neighborhood, and the motion passed unanimously. An official censure of Karen Weaver for impersonating HOA authority, forging documents, and conducting rogue enforcement. She was removed from any volunteer duties, access to HOA materials revoked, and banned from initiating communication under the HOA name. But if you thought that would slow her down, you don't know Karen. Because 3 days later, someone left a flyer on every porch in the neighborhood, titled The Truth They Don't Want You to Know, written entirely in Comic Sans. Guess whose name was on the bottom? The Comic Sans manifesto hit every doorstep like a glitter bomb of delusion. 8 pages long, stapled crooked and riddled with typos. It accused the HOA of corruption, my tree of threatening the balance of local weather, and me personally of harboring foliage with ill intent. It read like a suburban conspiracy thriller, ghost-written by a malfunctioning Alexa. I would have laughed if I weren't so exhausted. My maple still bore the shallow chainsaw gash Karen had carved in her initial attack, and while the bark hadn't split further, I didn't want to wait around for it to rot from the inside out. So I called in a professional, someone who understood trees better than HOA politics. Her name was Dr. Celia Monroe, certified arborist and regional expert in legacy trees. She showed up in a forest green Subaru, clipboard in hand and boots dirtier than my conscience after reading Karen's pamphlet. After examining the wound with a small flashlight and gently brushing back some bark, she let out a low whistle. "Whoever did this has no idea how lucky you got," she said. "Another inch deeper and you'd be dealing with a serious structural compromise." I asked if the tree would survive. "If it gets proper treatment, probably, but the wound's deep enough to leave lasting vulnerability. I'll file a full health report and valuation." A few days later, the report landed in my inbox and nearly knocked me out of my chair. Estimated value of the maple, $42,000, 0 cents to $56,000, 0 cents, depending on future stability. I reread the number 3 times. Apparently, century-old red maples in pristine condition weren't just shade providers, they were legal landmines. I forwarded the report straight to Officer Green and Marcus Bentley with the subject line, "Felony. Anyone?" Marcus replied within minutes, short and to the point, "We're calling an emergency vote tonight." Officer Green showed up at my house the next day with a copy of the report in hand. "I ran this past the city prosecutor," he said, pointing to the valuation figure. "This isn't petty vandalism anymore. If the tree dies or becomes unstable to the point of removal, we're looking at felony-level property damage." I blinked. "You mean Karen could actually be charged?" "Depends on what happens," he said, "but given the prior warning and documented trespassing, the case would be strong." That night, the HOA meeting was held in the Community Rec Center, which hadn't been this packed since the great barbecue sauce ban of 2019. Marcus stood at the podium like a man preparing to defuse a live grenade. "We've all seen the damage. We've all received the citations. And now we know the value of the tree Karen tried to destroy." There was a collective murmur. "As of this evening, per HOA bylaws and with community approval, Karen Weaver is officially removed from all volunteer positions, banned from issuing any HOA communication, and barred from entering private property without explicit consent." The vote passed unanimously. Even her next-door neighbor, who once defended her chili at the annual cook-off, voted yes. You'd think that would be the end of it, but this is Karen we're talking about. Less than 24 hours later, a motion-activated camera I'd installed near the tree caught something. Off. At 2:47 a.m., the screen lit up with a shadow moving through my backyard. No chainsaw this time. Just Karen, in slippers, holding a flashlight, and staring up at the maple like it owed her money. She didn't do anything, just stood there, watched, then turned and disappeared into the dark. I didn't sleep much that night. Something about the way she looked at that tree, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After catching Karen's midnight tree staring session on camera, I decided to triple check every lock, charge every battery, and back up every second of security footage to 3 separate drives. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being Karen-proof. But the funny thing was, despite her eerie little visit, she didn't come back, not for days. No citations, no flyers, no fake bylaws shoved under doors, just silence. And when Karen goes quiet, that's when you know something's building. And as it turns out, so was the weather. By the weekend, the local news was forecasting what they called a fast-moving atmospheric tantrum. Translation, wind, rain, and enough tree snapping gusts to make you reconsider every branch within 40 feet of your roof. I looked out at my red maple, still standing tall and proud, bandaged at the base where the arborist had treated it. I said a silent prayer to whatever tree gods handled HOA wars and hoped for the best. Meanwhile, 3 houses down, Karen's yard told a different story. In her front lawn stood a pine tree so dead it looked like it had signed its own obituary. Brown needles, hollow trunk, the thing was basically vertical mulch. I knew for a fact that at least 2 neighbors had warned her about it. One even offered to split the cost of removal. She'd refused, of course, said it added character. The storm hit Saturday night at 2:14 a.m. My power flickered. By 2:21, it was gone completely. The wind howled like it had a vendetta. I sat on the couch in the dark, sipping tea, watching the live feed from my battery-back camera system. My maple danced, but didn't falter. By 3:00 a.m., the worst had passed, and I finally dozed off to the sound of wind and rain calming down like a toddler who'd tired itself out from screaming. I woke up late and groggy. My phone had blown up with texts from neighbors, photos, all the same image from different angles. Karen's house, or rather, what was left of it. That sad, brittle pine tree, it had collapsed, splitting her roof open like a microwave burrito. The trunk lay diagonally through her living room. Tarps were being stretched. Fire trucks had come and gone. And Karen, oh Karen, was out front in a robe screaming at a city inspector. I didn't want to gawk, but yeah, I drove by strictly for academic purposes. She spotted me instantly and made a beeline through the soggy grass. "You did this," she shrieked, finger aimed like a curse. "You put something on my tree, some kind of chemical. You sabotaged it." I blinked. "Karen, I haven't been near your yard in weeks." "Lies," she yelled, fully unhinged. "You cursed mine and protected yours. You knew this storm was coming. You planned this." I almost asked her if she thought I controlled the weather through maple magic, but honestly, her face said yes. That's when Elena, my neighbor from across the street, stepped in. "Karen," she said firmly, "the HOA asked you to take that tree down last fall. I have the email. You ignored it. You said it was rustic." Another neighbor chimed in. "You said pine needles kept away negative energy." Karen spun around, wide-eyed, like the whole block had suddenly turned into a courtroom. But no one was on her side anymore. Even the firefighter packing up gear muttered under his breath, "Should have listened to the damn tree guy." As I pulled away, I saw her stomping back toward her house, robe dragging through the mud, arms flailing at the sky like she was placing a complaint with the clouds themselves. But I couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't the finale. No, this was just nature's opening act. Because that night, while I was reviewing the storm footage, I noticed something strange, a shadow by my fence, a figure, brief but familiar. And this time she was holding something long and bladed. You'd think after a dead pine tree rearranged her living room like a game of suburban Jenga, Karen might cool off, maybe reevaluate, maybe even consider therapy. But no, she doubled down. In fact, by Monday morning, she was already back to her favorite hobby, blaming the neighborhood for her own disaster. Only now the neighborhood had receipts. The whisper started at the mailbox, moved to the community dog park, and by midweek we're full on HOA folklore. Turns out Karen wasn't just making up bylaws. She'd also filed nearly 24 anonymous code complaints with the city in the past 6 months about her own neighborhood: lawn height, window tint, trash bins visible for 3 minutes too long. The kicker? One of those reports had been against her own house. According to city records, complaint 17 described unkempt grass exceeding HOA standards by 3.5 inches. The address, Karen's. The inspector even took a photo. Her mailbox, address clear as day, next to a patch of scraggly weeds. No one could explain it. Was it strategic, self-sacrifice, HOA performance art? It didn't stop there. Someone leaked a PDF from City Hall showing Karen had ignored 3 formal warnings about the dead pine in her yard. One of them was signed by the city arborist and literally highlighted the words "immediate safety hazard." She'd marked "disagree" in red pen next to it, not "will comply," just "disagree," like she thought city safety codes were up for debate. Meanwhile, while her roof gaped like an open wound and tarps flapped in the wind, Karen was sending emails to the HOA under a new subject line: Karen's Corner, Unfiltered Truth. She was still banned from speaking on behalf of the board, but that didn't stop her from mailing PDFs to everyone with clip art fire emojis and words like corruption, tree terrorism, and my personal favorite, anti-Karen bias. At that point, she wasn't a president. She wasn't a volunteer. She was a one-woman HOA LARP campaign. And somehow, every move she made kept backfiring in ways so poetic it felt scripted. She tried to report a neighbor's patio furniture as non-regulation color, only for the HOA to respond with a copy of her own form showing she approved that color scheme last year. She tried to claim her rain gutter was damaged by the wind, but security footage from a different neighbor caught her swinging a broom at a raccoon on her roof 2 hours before the storm. It wasn't sabotage, it was slapstick. Even the community bulletin board became a battleground. One morning, someone anonymously posted a laminated printout titled "Karen's Greatest Hits," listing her top 10 citations, 5 of which were against things that no longer existed, including trampoline noise violations for a house that had sold in 2021. The HOA let it stay up. No one complained. It became a local landmark. By Thursday, it felt like things were finally dying down. Karen had retreated into her house. No new flyers, no new sightings. I was starting to let myself breathe again. The storm had passed, literally and figuratively. So that night, I poured a glass of wine, sat on my back porch, and watched the sunset filter through the branches of my battered but standing maple. I even laughed to myself, thinking, maybe she's finally run out of ink. Then my phone buzzed. Motion alert, back fence, 11:47 p.m. I opened the app, grainy infrared footage, a figure slipping through the shadows, moving low, slow, careful, but unmistakable. Karen, back in slippers, hoodie pulled up, flashlight in one hand, and in the other, something long and metallic. The human brain does something strange when it sees a nightmare repeat itself. It doesn't panic. It gets quiet. When I saw Karen's blurry figure pacing near my fence again, flashlight beam slicing through the dark like a scalpel, my body didn't react. No racing heart, no shouting at the screen, just a cold, creeping certainty. She's back for the tree. That's when I noticed the object in her hand. Not a broom, not pruning shears. It was longer, heavier, and familiar, a gas-prepared chainsaw. Again, I didn't call 911 right away. I didn't have to. Just as she stepped fully into frame and knelt beside the maple's base, my neighbor Alina, bless her eternally caffeinated insomnia, texted me, "I hear something buzzing." "It's her, isn't it?" "Yeah, already calling." By the time I was pulling on pants and stepping outside onto my porch, the mechanical growl had returned. It wasn't as loud as the first time. Karen had learned to run it low, controlled, the way a thief picks a lock, but it was unmistakable, that feral hum cutting into wood with quiet vengeance. I stayed hidden behind the patio column, watching her hunch like some suburban lumberjack of doom. sawing through a scar she'd made weeks earlier. Blue and red lights flashed against my windows within 6 minutes. Officer Green was first on scene, stepping out of his cruiser mid-sentence with backup close behind. "Ma'am, drop the saw and put your hands," but Karen didn't stop. She barely even turned. "I am the neighborhood," she muttered, pulling the starter cord again. "I am the order here." It took 2 officers to disarm and escort her, shouting something about community rot and tree communism. They zip-tied her wrists in the driveway where the whole block could see, and when they marched her past my porch, I swear, she smiled at me. Full teeth, like she'd just accomplished something noble. The damage was worse than I expected. She'd made it more than halfway through the base of the trunk, cutting past bark and cambium into the very core. The next morning, the city sent out a certified arborist to inspect the wound. He didn't even need 5 minutes. "Structurally compromised," he said, voice flat. "This tree's done. One strong wind and it'll topple." I felt it in my gut, like watching someone rip the spine out of an old friend. Officer Green stayed behind to talk through charges. "Because of the previous warning," he said, flipping through his notes, "and the appraised value of the tree, we're filing this as felony property destruction, possibly organized vandalism if her email trail supports intent." It wasn't just the act. It was the pattern, the trespassing, the fake citations, the forged bylaws, the 2 a.m. return with intent and equipment. It built a case, a solid one. The DA got involved. Karen's mugshot hit the local paper. She looked smug, like a woman caught yelling at a PTA meeting, not a vandal in custody. And the neighborhood, they rallied. Neighbors brought over snacks, hired a tree memorialist. Yes, that's a thing. To document the red maple's history. Someone even suggested naming the next community park after it. Maple stands strong. Cute, if not a little sad. But behind the casseroles and sympathy cards, I couldn't shake one feeling. This wasn't just a neighborhood feud. It had become a symbol about lines, property lines, moral lines, and what happens when someone keeps crossing them. The city scheduled the tree for removal the following week. But the morning after Karen's arrest, I walked into my backyard to find something new. Not a chainsaw, not Karen, but a wooden stake in the ground, planted just 2 feet from where the maple once stood tall. Attached to it was a note. One line, printed in red ink. This was never about the tree. The morning the city came to take the tree down, I brewed the strongest cup of coffee I'd had in months. I didn't want to watch it happen, but I knew I had to. Closure isn't always pretty. It's often loud, splintering, and operated by men in reflective vests. The chainsaw that felled it wasn't Karen's this time. It was municipal, official. But the sound still hit me like a gut punch. A slow whine, a pause, then a groan as the red maple swayed once, twice, and finally came down with a thud that shook the ground and something inside me. By noon, only the stump remained. Sawdust scattered like pale confetti across the grass. 100 years of standing tall, reduced to rings. I stood there, quietly, not mourning the tree as much as everything it had come to represent. Calm, patience, history, roots, and how easily something steady can be split down the middle by someone obsessed with control. A few hours later, I noticed movement in the yard. I stepped outside to see Alina placing a small white bouquet at the edge of the stump. "Felt like it deserved something," she said. Behind her came Marcus Bentley, carrying a carved wooden sign. He didn't say anything, just nodded and set it down at the base of the trunk. Burned into the wood were the words, "It stood for 100 years. She lasted 6 months." By sundown, half the neighborhood had joined. Some brought flowers. Others brought their kids who'd always loved the shade. Someone placed a toy squirrel. There were no speeches, just silent tribute, a quiet reclaiming. And as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, a group of residents walked to the front gate of Marigold Heights and mounted a new welcome sign, a message to anyone entering and to anyone watching. "Respect grows here. No Karen allowed." The next morning, Officer Green stopped by. He didn't knock, just raised his coffee as I stepped out. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. DA offered a plea. She took it. Karen had accepted a suspended sentence, 18 months of probation, mandatory community service, and a restraining order barring her from re-entering the Marigold Heights HOA jurisdiction. "She's banned?" I asked. "Legally," he nodded. She's moving. Probably by the end of the week, told the judge the whole neighborhood conspired against her. Spirit's got some packing to do. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a pen and a notebook, not for any legal notes, just a letter to someone who would have understood all this better than anyone, my father. He planted that tree when he bought the house. Always told me, don't just build walls, plant something that outlives you. So I wrote, you're right. The roots matter, not just the trees. Ours too. I lost the maple, Dad, but I didn't lose what it stood for. This community, your community, stood with me. And the truth, it's still standing. I folded the letter and placed it in a small metal tin. The next day I buried it beneath the stump, just a few inches down under the spot where the roots had once stretched like arms beneath the soil. That space wasn't empty. It had been made ready, ready for something new. As I stood up, brushing dirt off my hands, I noticed something I hadn't before. Just a tiny sprout near the edge of the old root line, a volunteer shoot, maple maybe, or maybe not, hard to say, but it was growing. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was too. Some battles aren't won by shouting or suing or even surviving a chainsaw. They're won by standing still, holding your ground while chaos spins itself out. Karen thought control came from fear, from fake titles and louder voices. But the truth? Real strength doesn't make noise. It takes root. Ethan didn't fight her with fists of fury. He fought her with boundaries, facts, and the one thing Karen couldn't understand, community. In the end, she left behind a broken roof and a legacy of rolled eyes. But Ethan kept something deeper, his peace, his neighbors, and a promise his father planted with a single tree. What's rooted in respect will always outlive ego. If you've ever had to stand your ground quietly but firmly, share your story in the comments. And remember to like, subscribe, and plant something worth growing.